Hi, everyone. It's Dr. Sheftal again with Truth in Science. This is a SARS-2 update, including some stuff about the virus and the reaction to it, and also the vaccine. And today's date is February 10th, 2021. So let's get started. This is the bona fides page, which we'll skip. Just remember to check me out on Patreon if you're interested in becoming a patron. I'd really appreciate it. This presentation today is going to be, I call it a pull no punches presentation, because I, like many of you, I'm sure, have just gotten so frustrated with the very poor handling of this virus and the misrepresentation of its progress in the media and so forth. And it's time we start calling out some of these people who have absolutely botched this with the lockdowns, which caused so much destruction and absolutely didn't change the graphs at all. Now the mask thing is hotter than ever. They're talking about wearing 2 masks at one time now. I even heard someone on TV say that we should be wearing 3 masks at the same time. It's just getting to be comical almost. So let's go over some of these slides. A lot of it will be repeated, but I'll go over the repeated part very fast. I just want to review some of the things that have been done during the pandemic. So I made up a way of delivering the information where I just ask a few obvious questions and we just list the answers. Question 1 is, what mistakes have the experts made from the beginning to the introduction of the vaccines? Well, the first mistake they made is they were off on the infection fatality rate by between 20 times and 70 times, meaning they claimed that the infection fatality rate was 3.5%, 4%, even 7% in one case, but always, like I say, 20 to 70 times too high. The actual infection fatality rate is 0.1%. And myself and Dr. Ioannidis and Dr. Levitt figured this out very quickly. And then Dr. Ioannidis actually did the footwork. He took surveys in Santa Clara County near Stanford, where he works, and demonstrated what we had all sort of figured out theoretically based on measurement of entire populations. At least that's the way I did it, in a small town in Germany and on a cruise ship. And when people are engaged in selection bias, where they're not counting asymptomatic patients, the only way that you can get the actual infection fatality rate would be to count everyone in an isolated population. That would do it, and that's the way I did it. Or you can use very scientific sampling, which was done later by USC in LA County, and I think they came up with 0.17%. Everyone that actually looked into this and did it properly started to get the correct infection fatality rate after we kind of broke the ice and said, no, these modelers and epidemiologists and the TV doctors, they're all wrong. There's no way it's 4%. Okay. And of course, I've talked about this a lot in the previous videos I've done, the consequences of the incorrect infection fatality rate caused so much destruction in the world. Starting with the lockdowns. We've already talked about the 150 million people who will starve to death because of the economic fallout of the lockdowns. People lost their life savings, they lost their job, their small businesses. There were increases in alcoholism, child abuse, suicide, etc. And people weren't willing to go into the hospital and get cancer screenings last year. Which is going to cause a lot more death in the future. My point is that if the public had known that the infection fatality rate of this thing was the same as the seasonal flu, no one would have agreed to a lockdown. Because 4% of 350 million people, the population of the United States is 14 million people, which is certainly enough to scare people into agreeing to a lockdown. But of course, that was off by 40 times. Not 40%, 40 times. It's just incredible how far off these people were. And of course, Europe has more people than the United States, and predictions in Europe were that 20 million people would die. Okay. School closings was a complete disaster. I wrote an essay about this early on that said, you know, the flu kills 200 school-aged children per year. And in 2017, 2018, the number was 650. So this virus is not very virulent in that age group. And it turns out that as per the CDC's weekly morbidity and mortality report in September, only 51 students had died. And of course, that's 1/4 of the average for the flu. And we never closed the schools for the flu. So I sort of posed the question, how could we be closing it for this when the flu is much worse and the morbidity for the flu is infinitely worse than for COVID for children? So of course, people began to think about this as well. And come the fall, when some schools did open for a short period of time, studies were done to see if the fears were justified or not. And in North Carolina, for example, in 11 school districts, there was 9 weeks of in-person instruction, 90,000 students and teachers, 32 people got COVID, and there were no instances of child to adult transmission, because that was the biggest worry, was that a teacher would come in and a child would give them the virus. But in that case, in North Carolina, over 9 weeks with 90,000 students and teachers, not a single child to adult transmission occurred. And then Wisconsin in the fall, during 13 weeks, there were 17 K through 12 schools, a lot of schools over 13 weeks. And remember, in the fall, Wisconsin took the virus very hard. It was sort of their turn to get their first wave. Remember, I talked about all along that there really weren't second waves of this. It was first waves occurring in different parts of the country. And that certainly turned out to be true. Anyway, at the worst time of year for Wisconsin, which was in the fall, there was not a single child to adult transmission. 7 cases of in-school transmission occurred, and all were student to student. In Tennessee, 2 schools studied very detailed with regular testing. There were 3,520 students. 137 cases were positive, which is more than the other 2 states. However, 59 of those 137 occurred over the Thanksgiving holiday when the students weren't at school. And 28 were traced to an off-campus party. So that left only 50 cases. And all were student to student. There wasn't a single student to adult transmission. Of the cases that occurred in those 3 very detailed studies, very few patients had any symptoms, and no one even went to the hospital. Okay, here was another mistake that was made, and very upsetting, you know, because I did a video on this when some studies were finally done correctly. All of the studies that were quoted by the TV doctors all along were done incorrectly. Either they did not use zinc with hydroxychloroquine, or they gave way too high of a dose, or they studied people in the hospital. The cohort that was claimed to benefit from hydroxychloroquine and zinc was made up of high-risk patients who were ambulatory, who came into an outpatient clinic. They had enough symptoms to go see the doctor, but they weren't so sick that they needed hospitalization. And the hydroxychloroquine and zinc at the correct dose was finally studied in randomized controlled trials at Baylor College of Medicine and at NYU Medical School. And it not only was helpful, it was spectacularly successful. There was a reduction of 90% of the hospitalizations and 75% of the deaths in that study at Baylor. And, you know, 400,000 people have died of something, and you reduce that number by 75%, you're down to 100,000. So one thing that really did bother me, other than just because everybody makes mistakes, you know, I'm not really complaining that the TV doctors made a lot of mistakes, although I'm very disappointed. I expected them to do much better. They gave a number of them gave conflicting evidence the entire time. And I've done a 4-hour video on the entire SARS pandemic, and detailed every one of these mistakes. But just to talk about this one in particular, you'll remember that hydroxychloroquine and zinc, that combination as a treatment, was even banned by the governor of Michigan and a few other places. And because of these so-called studies that had proven that it was ineffective. But like I said, all of those studies were incorrectly designed. I looked them up myself because I remember them saying, oh, there's 6 studies that prove that it doesn't work at all. So I kind of took their word for it at first until they started saying that hydroxychloroquine was dangerous. Hydroxychloroquine is used as a prophylactic. You take it before you even get malaria if you're traveling. And they don't usually use dangerous drugs for prophylaxis because you're treating people before they've even got the disease. So I knew something wasn't right. And I remembered vaguely that it was used in lupus and rheumatoid arthritis. So I looked it up, and yes, people take hydroxychloroquine for 25 or 30 years sometimes for lupus or rheumatoid arthritis. So I'm thinking, wow. And so I looked up the side effect profile, and it was incredibly safe. It wasn't dangerous at all. And these are people taking it for 30 years straight. And for COVID, you'd only be taking it for a month. So I knew something was really wrong. And these TB doctors that are all internal medicine doctors for the most part, except for Sanjay Gupta, who's a neurosurgeon, were saying that it was dangerous. I mean, these doctors, I learned this in medical school, and I'm 35 years or something out of medical school, and I still remember it, how safe it is. And I'm not an internal medicine doctor, I'm a surgeon. So I'm thinking, how could they not know this? And how could they tell the public that it's dangerous when they're internal medicine doctors who treat lupus and rheumatoid arthritis? Bothered me very much. Okay. But they scared the public away from using that therapy that, according to the randomized controlled trials, could have saved 75% of the high-risk patients that were ambulatory. In other words, the patients before they got very sick. So in my presentation, which I'd love it if you could go see, I showed the mechanism of action of hydroxychloroquine. And one of the things that it does many things, but one of the things that it does is prevents the T helper cells from releasing all the cytokines, which can be done zealously, if you will, overzealously, and cause the lungs to fill with fluid. So if you try to treat patients that are in the hospital, they've already had their T helper cells releasing the cytokines and causing the fluid to get into their lungs. But if you give it to them when they're ambulatory, very soon after their symptoms have started and they're still walking around, going to their clinic to see their doctor in their car and walking into the clinic, that sort of thing, you could be giving in the hydroxychloroquine before the T helper cells have had time to cause all this fluid in the lungs. And that may be why it works well at the beginning and doesn't work later. But of course, the doctors that came on television or wrote essays about this said that it was for high-risk patients. We're talking about patients over 50 that have a comorbidity. That in their clinics, they'd had lots of patients and all of them did very, very well on hydroxychloroquine and zinc. That was another problem with the studies. None of them used zinc. And zinc was a very integral part of that cocktail that the clinical doctors that claimed that it worked used, okay? They had zinc in that mixture. The other drug that's been poo-pooed completely is ivermectin. And that was also included in the Baylor study, and it's incredibly effective. So instead of using these two treatments, which are incredibly inexpensive, I'm talking less than $20. I remember ivermectin's treatment course, it cost $17.14. And anyway, they were pushing, if you'll remember, remdesivir, which is a new drug, which was shown not to work at all later. Really wonder about the motivation of this stuff sometimes. All right, so here's the summary. Talks about the reduction and so forth. This is the graphic that I used on my video. So if you look them up, if you go to YouTube and put my name in and then click on it, and then click on videos, you'll see this mass there, along with all the other videos I've made about this. I think I've made about 14 or 15 videos on COVID since it started. So you can watch that again and you'll see more details, and you'll see the mechanism of action of ivermectin also. And it makes so much sense. It's almost painful to understand it after it's been banned and poo-pooed and outright lied about. Okay. Yeah, the experts in this idiocy with promoting testing everyone with a test that doesn't measure active virus. It measures the RNA, which can be in the nasopharynx months after you've recovered, and calling something a new case when that test is positive. It is so misleading or outright, I don't even know what word to use. You know, to use a test that doesn't even measure active virus, that comes up positive months after the person has already recovered from the disease, and then counting that as a new case. Not just a new case, but a hospitalization and a death is, to me, just so unscientific, let's say. It's a nice way to put it. The other problem with the test is that I explained this in one of my videos also, so a lot of this is repetition. I apologize. I just wanted to summarize where we are right now. The cycle threshold is the number of times, okay, the chain reaction occurs. And we've looked at this now to see how many cycles are involved in the possibility of an active virus. And the number's about 28. Yet they were running this chain reaction through 40 cycles to try to find positive cases. I mean, it's just incredible that they could mismanage this so bad. And that's if there was nothing nefarious about it, which I hate to believe there was, but I mean, come on. How could these people not understand this? This is a simple test. I wrote it as a quote in one of my videos: you can take a totally insignificant molecule and amplify it into the end of the world. And that's what they did. Okay. Now let's talk about the vaccines a little bit, because that's the current topic. I'll get to a few graphs later that will tell you where we are with the virus. And they're kind of interesting, but let's talk about the vaccines for a second. First of all, in my opinion, they shouldn't even be called vaccines. And let me sort of tell you why here. Here's what we know so far. They don't keep you from getting the virus, okay? I saw an expert on TV, a different expert. This guy was more of a laboratory guy. And he said that he thinks, and his group thinks, that it gives you about a 50% reduction in the number of people who get the virus. So it does reduce it a little bit, 50%. Okay. They do not block transmission. The vaccines do not block transmission from one person to another. They were not tested in animals, but they're being tested in humans now. So we don't know if they will have the antibody-mediated enhancement that we saw in other vaccine trials in animals. And that is very dangerous, because what happened in those trials was they would give a certain number of the animals the vaccine. They would have the same number of animals not getting the vaccine, and then they would give the virus to both animals. More animals who had the vaccine died than ones that did not have the vaccine. Now, how could that possibly be? Well, it turns out if you don't have quite enough antibodies to really destroy the virus, and I'm paraphrasing for the layman here, you actually will enhance the phagocytic cells, like macrophages, to bring the virus inside the cell, okay? In other words, you're helping the virus get inside the cell where it can multiply. And if there's not enough antibodies on it, somehow it's able to release its RNA and hijack the replication machinery in those phagocytic cells, okay, and release multiple copies. So you're actually, the fact that there's some antibodies around, which enhances phagocytosis and gets the virus inside the cell, because you didn't have quite enough antibodies to really damage it, you're actually helping it get inside the cell. And that's why it killed. That's why giving the virus to the animals that had already been vaccinated made it worse, made more of them die. Okay, that's a pretty good summary of that. Doesn't make sense at first, but when you think about it, it does, if you know the mechanisms of all these. Next problem with the vaccine, it's for last year's variant. Taking the vaccine now with all the new variants that have come out from South Africa, Brazil, Great Britain. By the way, remember all the controversy there was about calling it the China virus? Now all the people on the far left, and I don't mean to make this political, but the same people that complained that Trump called it the China virus are now calling it the South American virus or the Brazil variant or the Great Britain variant. So they're doing the same exact thing they'd complained about Trump doing, calling it from where it comes from, which is actually the traditional accepted way to identify these viruses. You've heard of the Hong Kong flu, Japanese encephalitis, Ebola. These are all based, the names are based on where they come from. Okay. You know, it boggles the mind sometimes how political everything is getting. I mean, golly, you can't even call the virus the traditional name without being attacked. All right, let's drop that for a second. Anyway, they're for last year's variant. And to me, it makes about as much sense with these new variants coming online, which are more transmissible and are gonna be the primary virus very soon. It makes about as much sense as taking last year's flu shot, because you have to take flu shots before the season, not after the season's over. And we've already been through an entire cycle with the original SARS-2, I'll call it. I won't call it the Chinese virus. I'll call it SARS-2, okay? Now, so, I mean, I think the people that have already had the virus, I mean, the vaccine, and it does protect you a little bit in some ways. It certainly there's no question that it reduces the severity. But when if someone comes on television, like the director of the CDC, which I saw yesterday, comes on television and talks about whether a vaccine is helpful for a severe case because it reduces the symptoms, how could she be really talking about a vaccine? She's kind of talking about a therapy, isn't she? That it's helpful to get someone who gets the disease anyway and it prevents them from getting a really severe case. That's really not traditionally what a vaccine is. A vaccine is there to build up your immune response so significantly that it prevents you from getting sick or getting the disease again, okay? Like take the measles vaccine. I had the vaccine when I was young, and I'm not gonna get the measles virus, okay? Because the measles vaccine is a real vaccine. It prevents people from getting it. Now it's 97% effective, but it's 97% effective in preventing you from getting the disease. These numbers quoted by the Pfizer vaccine and the Moderna are 95 and 94% effective at reducing the severity of the disease. So they're more like therapies, really. I wouldn't call them vaccines, and they're very experimental because, again, animals were not tested, and that concerns me a little, of course. All right, the other mistake the experts made is part of what we know about the vaccines, and that is that they kept saying that you need 80% of the US population to get herd immunity. Well, when I heard that, I'm thinking, how could they not understand the human immune response? Lots and lots of people in America, and I did some calculations based on the WHO telling us that 750 million, this is back in September now, that 750 million people in the world had already been exposed to this because they said that 10% of the world's population had, and the world has 7.8 billion people. So 780 million people had been exposed. Yet the information that we see on TV every day was telling us at the time that 1/17 of that had been exposed worldwide. So I multiplied the number that had been exposed in the United States by 17 and found out that about 150 million of Americans had been exposed already, not the 11 million or so, or 9 million at the time that they were telling us on TV. So they've been really off on how many of us are exposed. And again, that brings up another point where they're just completely wrong. When you've been exposed to the disease, you truly are protected from getting it again. Now, I'm going to show you a slide in a second that's going to explain that, but just think about it for a second. Now it's more like 800 million people that have been exposed or more in the world. If 800 million people have been exposed to something and only 24 have gotten the disease again, think about that. Only 24 people out of 800 million. That's much better protection than getting one of these vaccines. It doesn't even prevent half of the people from getting it. You know, think about that for a second. Lots of people that have gotten the vaccine will get this virus inside them. Okay? It's not 96% effective in preventing you from getting the virus, getting infected. The measles vaccine is, but not this one. Everyone has said that over and over again if you're listening. It's only 96 or 94% effective in reducing the symptoms, which is important. Might keep you from dying, but it's not going to keep you from getting the disease. Plus, how could you transmit it to someone else? I keep talking about it doesn't prevent you from transmitting it to someone else. How could you transmit it to someone else if it hasn't taken hold in your body somewhere? And generally it's in your nose and nasopharynx probably, you know? But do you understand where I'm coming from this? Everything they're saying is kind of contradictory, because Dr. Fauci got on TV and said the vaccine is more effective in protecting you than getting the disease. That makes absolutely no sense, which I'll show you in a second with a graphic that shows that when you get the disease, you have you have T cell protection against the N protein, which stabilizes the RNA, the M protein, which determines the radius of curvature, and the non-structural proteins, in addition to the spike proteins. Okay, and also when you inject a virus into your arm, you know, it goes into your deltoid, and it should enter the deltoid muscle. I'm talking about the RNA that's in the vaccine, and make the spike proteins, and you'll make antibodies to them and so forth. That's how it's supposed to work. And it certainly does work that way. But what if that vaccine somehow got in a vein and circulated to another organ in your body? Because if you remember some of the primers that I've given on immunology, when an antigen gets inside the cell, it gets presented on the surface by the major histocompatibility complex. And if it does so in the context of class 1, then the T killer cells will kill that cell. Well, I don't mind if a few deltoid cells get killed, but I don't really want that thing circulating somewhere in my body and killing cells from other organs. I don't want it to be in my heart killing cells, for example, or my brain. So that's a possibility too, which I haven't heard anyone address. I thought of it actually while I was making a video, it just popped into my head. What if this gets in a vein and goes to another organ? Okay, so this is sort of what we know about the vaccine so far. And I haven't even talked about the side effects. Of course, we've had patients with anaphylactic shock and so forth. And we've had quite a number of deaths. For some reason, there are quite a lot of them in Norway there for a while. But I read one article that I thought was legitimate that had the death toll at 391 patients so far in the world, and we've had millions of vaccines administered. But it's for what you benefit from the vaccine for. Remember, it's for last year's variant, and the protection that it actually gives you, and it does give you some protection against severe symptoms, which is very important. It might save your life, the vaccine. But remember, this is a disease that's, depending on your age group, let me say it that way, depending on your age group, the chance of surviving is way better than the efficacy of the vaccine in many ways. And the vaccine certainly puts you at some risk. So for certain age groups, and I'm talking about people maybe under 30, boy, you have to do a lot of explaining to me to justify getting the vaccine when the disease has a 99.999% survival rate. Anyway, let me continue on here. So here's the slide I was talking about. I'll try to use the pointer. I'll just make this very simple. This is a graphic person here who is getting SARS-2, okay? And they mount responses, of course, with the CD4 and CD8, which are detectable. So in the case of the CD4, 100% of the respondents in this study that got the virus mounted a CD4 response, 100%. And 100% made IgG and IgA for the spike proteins, okay? And it's a very robust response. I mean, look at this, five dashes here is the maximum response. So everybody got antibodies. IgG was 100%, IgA was 80%. Everybody got antibodies in this study to the spike protein. And that's what sort of the vaccine is based on. But remember, these are people that were exposed to the real virus. They also got responses to the M, N, and non-structural proteins, as I was saying before. And these proteins, the M, N, and non-structural proteins, do not change as often as the spike proteins. We've already found out that in the South American variant and the Great Britain variant, that it's the spike proteins that have mutated. So it makes you wonder why they made the vaccine make the spike proteins. Why not make something that doesn't change? And I brought this up, and I know there's reasons to make antibodies to the spike proteins because, you know, the antibodies can see the spike proteins easily on the surface of the virus when they get produced by the plasma cells. But wouldn't it have been nice to throw in a few M and N proteins into the mix, into the messenger RNA mix in the vaccine, so that we would also have antibodies and T cell response to the M and N proteins, which do not change? And I know that they don't change because we've looked at those proteins in SARS-1, which, if you remember, came on the scene in 2003, I believe it was. Might have been 2005. I get those dates mixed up for some reason. I think it was 2003. And the antibodies to the N protein, the protein that stabilizes the messenger RNA or the RNA in the virus, are still there the same as they were in 2003, okay? And what's amazing is they're the same as the SARS-2 N proteins. They haven't changed, and that's part of the commonality between SARS-1 and SARS-2. There's a 70% commonality. So, wow, they found, remember SARS-1 only infected 8,000 people in the world and 800 died. That's why there was a 10% death rate for that, which was very high. Really, people really were justified to be scared of that one. But it turns out only 8,000 people in the world got it. So with a lot of detective work, they found 23 people who had it and survived in the study that I read. And they looked at their blood and their T cells and their B cells, and they found out that 17 years, yeah, it was 2003, 17 years after the people got SARS-1, they still had robust T cell presence. Remember clonal expansion for memory? If you remember my primers, you remember all this, but they still had T cells in their body for the N protein of SARS-1, okay? 17 years later. Wouldn't it have been nice for us to have put a little bit of N protein codons in the messenger RNA that we put inside the vaccine so it would last and not mutate? Okay. Sorry for being sarcastic there, but I'd love to hear the logic of why they chose something that changes every 4 months. Okay, maybe they want to sell more vaccines. But I'll tell you, if you've gotten the vaccine for the SARS-2, the one that came on the scene last January, you're going to have to get another vaccine probably. Now they're going to call it a booster, so it won't seem like you have to do it all over again. But listen, if these vaccines don't work very well against some other variant that's coming soon, you're going to have to get another shot, or we all are. Let's put it that way. What a shame. All right, now listen, kind of like the flu every year. You might have to get a shot for this every year, or maybe every 6 months if it mutates faster. But let me say a few more things. The AstraZeneca vaccine that has just recently come online has been taken off the market in South Africa because it's not effective at all against the South African variant, supposedly. I just heard that today. Anyway, isn't that something? Now, just looking back at this, though, really quickly to review this. This is in a patient who got infected by the virus. And as you see, there was a robust response, all 5 dashes to all these other proteins too. And then you've got Dr. Fauci on television telling us that the vaccine gives you more protection than getting the disease when you've got antibodies to all these other proteins and they don't mutate. And boy, I just find that very strange because we all know the spike proteins mutate a lot. The viruses they're not living things. They're a capsule carrying genetic information, but they're smart somehow because they do have a system that causes their spike proteins to mutate a lot, okay? And the spike proteins are on the surface. So somehow that kind of protects them from going extinct. You couldn't figure out a better way to do it if you tried. All right, now let's look down here at the unexposed group, because this brings up the point about the experts saying that we need 80% of the population to be vaccinated. And I'll prove that that's not the case in a few slides, but let me continue with this for a second. This is in a patient who was completely unexposed to the virus and did not come into contact with anyone who was exposed to the virus. And he's got, or not him personally, but 50% of the people in the study already had CD4 response. That's a T cell. They already had T cells in their body, and 20% had T killer cells. Up here for the people exposed, we had 100% and 70%. Down here, it's 50 and 20. But people that have never been exposed to SARS-2 had all this T cell memory ready to attack the virus when it comes in. This is for spike proteins, SARS-2 spike proteins, non-structural proteins, and M proteins. Remember the M proteins determine the radius of curvature of the capsule to maximize the density of the spikes, so it's more likely to hit an ACE2 receptor as it's tumbling through the blood or the airway passages or the GI tract. Okay. Anyway, I mean, look at the response here. You've got 4 dashes here. Oops. You got 4 dashes on the spike protein. You've got 3 dashes on the non-structural and the M proteins. And isn't that amazing? Well, the only explanation for this is that there's cross-reactivity among the coronaviruses. Remember, the patient in this study is not someone who had SARS-1. There were only 7,200 of them in the entire world since 2003, and a bunch of those have died. That's why it was so hard to find 23 patients where they looked at their T cell immunity to the N proteins. It was a different study, but you understand that it was amazing that they were even able to find 23 people who got SARS-1 and survived from 17 years ago. But just to continue here, because this is so important, it seems like the experts are completely missing on this, the ones on television anyway, that are telling you 80% of the population needs to get the vaccine for herd immunity. These are coronaviruses. Now, coronaviruses are really common. Along with adenoviruses and rhinoviruses, those are the viruses that cause the common cold. And all of us have had the common cold. So I would bet my bottom dollar that almost everyone watching this has gotten a coronavirus before. And there's commonality in the proteins that are translated from messenger RNA in those viruses. So you've already got antibodies. You don't have antibodies necessarily, because antibodies are a molecule and they're subject to half-lives like any molecule. But you've got clonal expansion of B cells, and you've got clonal expansion of T cells. And we actually quantify it in this study. And 50% of the people in this study, without ever being exposed to SARS-2, have T cells. 50% of them have T helper cells to SARS-2. To 3 of the proteins in SARS-2, and 20% of them have T killer memory to it. Okay, and I call this immunity in place. I kind of coined that term, I think. I hadn't read it anywhere, but that's what I've been calling it. Now other people are starting to call it that have talked to me. All right, let's go on here. But you understand this. So the point is, there's a lot of people in the population before the SARS-2 even got to America that were protected. Was it 50%? Probably not. I'm guessing it was 30 to 40 of us were protected before the virus even got here. Okay. And the reason I say that, I can say that based on this study and just based on thinking it through with coronaviruses and the commonality in the genes. But here's the proof of it, kind of. In nursing homes, some of the patients got very sick and died from this when it got into the nursing home. And of course, they're breathing and possibly sneezing and coughing too, but mostly just breathing when they had SARS-2, when they were very, very sick. And so the SARS-2 kind of got all over the nursing home, just as if they were breathing smoke out, and eventually there'd be smoke in the whole building, kind of, because that's the best analogy I can think of about how people breathe out this virus and it stays in the air. It's actually lighter and smaller than the particulates and smoke. So it would even be more than smoke, and you can't smell it like you can smell smoke, but it's a pretty good comparison. If you could see or smell SARS-2 like you can see and smell smoke, it would scare you to death. You could be walking into houses where it's just filled with this stuff. Pretend it was orange. It'd be like you open the door and all the air in the house was orange. That's what it's like. Of course, you can't see it, so you don't know that. So anyway, back to the nursing home. Some people in the nursing home didn't die that were very sick. They had a lot of comorbidities and they're 90 years old. Why did they survive it? My guess is that those people had immunity in place because they were one of the 50%, let's say, or one of the 20% with T killers, but they had some kind of immunity in place, and that prevented them from getting sick from SARS-2 and dying. But certainly it prevented them from getting sick, because at their age, with their comorbidities, if they had gotten sick from SARS-2, there's a very high mortality rate. But some people didn't get sick at all in the nursing homes. Really, really, really old people with lots of comorbidities. That's the explanation that I came up with. And I think it makes sense. It just makes too much sense not to be true. All right, let's move on here. Oh, good. Now, I think I've gotten into the graphs here. The graphs are a little more interesting than just watching me talk. So again, this is the thing with 80% of the US population has to have the vaccine to get herd immunity. All right. So, we've gotten maybe double this now in the number of people who have been vaccinated, but at the peak of these curves, only 11 million people in the United States had been vaccinated. And yet the number of cases has turned and gone down now. Okay. And if you know anything about why it went up in the first place, you know that when the curves start to turn and go down, it's because the virus really can't find as many people to infect anymore, because so many people are immune to it, not susceptible anymore, right? That's the whole principle or the whole mechanism of herd immunity. We'll talk about that later. But how could the virus in the season have turned and gone down with only 11 million people being vaccinated? 11 million divided by 365 million is 3%. Whereas the experts said at least 80% need to be vaccinated before we'd get herd immunity and the curve would turn down. And again, it's because I would say at least 30% of the people in America had immunity in place from previous exposure to the common cold coronaviruses. And 40% have already been exposed. Now, I wrote NPR today here because it was actually yesterday. NPR put out this really exciting study from somebody at Columbia University who said, I think 120 million people have been exposed. And of course, I said 150 million 3 months ago, as if this NPR thing was this really big eureka moment, light bulb on. Oh my God, there's way more people exposed and protected in America than we thought. Been saying it for 9 months, 10 months. Okay. But you can't, someone like me cannot get on television because it kind of goes against the narrative. Doesn't matter how logical it is or how correct it is. As a matter of fact, when I realized the infection fatality rate was wrong, and I realized that this would cause the population to accept horrible, draconian, and very destructive measures, I wrote letters to people at CNN, wrote them to Cuomo and Anderson Cooper. Please let me come on your show for 5 minutes and explain this. I haven't heard anybody say this yet, and this is very important. I studied populations that were fixed, and the infection fatality rate is way lower than experts and the epidemiologists. They're all wrong. Nobody even wrote me back and said, sorry, we think you're crazy or whatever. People told me I was crazy on Facebook, but they didn't, the media people didn't write me back. And then I wrote Tucker Carlson and Hannity and people told me to write Fox because it was more conservative and they might be willing to have someone come on and explain that everybody's wrong or something. Didn't hear a word from any of them. So, of course, I was right. But anyway, not of course, I'm wrong a lot, but it turns out I was right. Let me say it that way. So we've got 40% are exposed already of the US population. 30% had immunity in place to begin with. There you have it, okay? We've probably, or like, not probably, it's no question, we're getting really close to herd immunity in some places. There might be a few pockets that don't have it yet, but most places in America have herd immunity already. That's why you see these curves turning down like this for the whole country now. We've had them turn down for different regions for the same reason, but now the whole country's turning down. So we're getting there, folks. Believe me, we're already there, really. But let me continue on with this good discussion here, because there's another thing here that blows my mind. When you look at all these different countries or continents, United States is here, Russia, Canada, Mexico, Europe, all of Europe, and you look at and you notice that the peaks happen on exactly the same day. I mean, we're talking within hours of each other here before they all turned down and went down. Look at this. Draw a vertical line through here. You hit each one of these peaks right at the peak. That tells you that, and all of these countries have different policies on lockdowns and masks and everything. Some countries aren't locking down, some are, etc. This just tells you that the virus is kind of doing what it wants to do. You know, it's naturally going through its cycle and turning down. And all of these countries I've listed here in continent are in the Northern Hemisphere. If we put some in that were in the Southern Hemisphere, the graph would be completely different. But all the ones in the Northern Hemisphere are peaking at on the same day almost. And again, the vaccine has nothing to do with it. Look at this. In the United States, per capita, depending on which European country is, we've either vaccinated 3 times as many or 10 times as many as the countries in Europe, 5 times as many as Canada. This is per capita too. This isn't just because we're a bigger country. 18 times more than Russia and 22 times more than Mexico. And yet the peaks are all exactly in the same place. Why isn't our peak way earlier? And why didn't it come down way earlier if we're vaccinating that many more people? If the vaccine is doing it, it's not doing it. All right, let's continue on. Lots of graphs here. What's this? Okay, new confirmed cases by states and territories in the United States. And so here's the entire United States. And these are the cases during the year. Now, a lot of people have said, oh my God, there's so many more cases now. It's way worse than it's been the whole year. But that's not true, because they're comparing the entire United States. Okay, and yes, this was the entire United States earlier in the year, so that's all true. But the entire United States early in the year was made up of the Northeast only, if you remember. It hadn't gotten to the South and the upper Midwest and the Plain states and the mountain states. So they're saying it's worse now because they're comparing every region in America, the seasonal bump, they all stack up on top of each other, to the Northeast bump, and it went down to 0, as I'll show you in a second. After they had their bump, it went down to 0, to the bump in the South, and it went down to zero after the bump, but of course it bumped up again in the seasonal time, which is perfectly natural and should occur, to the upper Midwest bump, the Plain State bump, the Mountain State bump, California's bump. And why is California different and so bad now? Because California is made up of lots of regions, okay? It's got mountains, it's got hot areas, it's got all kinds of problems as far as being in different temperate zones or different climate zones at the same time. You know, it goes 2/3 of the entire West Coast. Let me continue on. But that's why everything looks so bad now when it isn't. Plus, we're testing more with a test that does not measure active virus. It only measures the viral RNA that could be there months after you recovered from the disease. These are deaths per day by states and territories. And I've outlined New York here, and this is sort of what I'm talking about. Although I was talking about cases before and I'm talking about deaths now. You can see that there were way more deaths in the Northeast back when they had their initial horrible bump. I mean, horrible first wave. And then it went to nothing until they got their seasonal bump. This is exactly what you expected to do. Okay. Now, these are cases, okay? And these are hospitalizations. And I just want to keep this in perspective for you. Now, by the way, these are 15 minutes old. I just got these off the sites that do these graphs. These are confirmed cases here in New York. The blue line, the very strong blue line there. And these are the other states. And of course, they do the same thing. These are the ones in the South. See, you've got a bunch of I hope you guys can see this. You see a bunch of huge peaks here in cases, and there were hardly any cases in the South at the beginning when New York and the Northeast were getting it, okay? And then the South went down to nothing, and then Wisconsin and the upper Midwest guys got it, and then the Plain states, and then blah, 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 okay? And now, you know, California and some other places are getting it. But look at the hospitalization in New York. It was horrible at the beginning, in that terrible time at the beginning when everybody got sick in the Northeast. Horrible. And then after that, no hospitalizations, none. Look at that, 0, all the way up to day 0, which is today, okay? So, and yet the cases are going wild. And yet nobody goes to the hospital? Wow. I mean, look at all the cases for the other states too. They're literally off the chart, you know, which is a familiar expression we all use. And if they're off the chart, they go way up here and then they come down here, you know, just massive. I don't know how, but maybe they go up to the ceiling in my apartment. But the hospitalizations are way down here. Okay. So all this talk about not being able to handle the hospitalizations of these patients is hard to believe. Let's put it that way. Now, I know that it adds up because remember this about hospitalizations and ICUs and all that. Hospitals are places that are in business to make money, unfortunately, or fortunately. It's hard to know when you're talking about people's health, you know, should you be trying to make money or not? But anyway, that's a different discussion. But they try to keep the ICUs very close to full all the time because ICUs are very expensive to run when the beds are empty, or they're big money losers when the bed is empty. When patients are in all the beds, they're getting reimbursement for those beds. The nurses that work in the ICU are really crackerjack nurses. They are brilliant ladies and men that set up all the IVs. If you've ever been to an ICU and looked at all the tubes and everything, you wonder where it's all going and how did they hook it up right and all that, but they do. And anyway, they get paid a lot because they're very well educated and so forth and well trained. So hospitals, even when there's no pandemic, try to keep their ICUs at 85% or 90% occupied. And every time there's a bad flu season, they all overflow then too, but nobody tests everyone in the United States and goes through all this. Like in, I remember 2006, 2017, 2018, I saw a picture from a hospital in San Diego where ICU patients were in the hall. And it was sad because some of them died in the hall, of course, from the flu. And, but it just shows you the hospitals operate on a very tight occupancy profile to keep them from going bankrupt. All right. This is the total COVID-19 vaccines administered by different states. And I just picked Florida here, but they're all very similar. Here's Texas. This is Florida. This is, excuse my bad eyes here. This is New York. And you know, of course, these are the big states. So of course, the total vaccines administered are going to be higher in Florida, Texas, California, and New York. That's the 4 biggest states. But what I want you to notice here is this is when Biden took over right here. And the slope of this line is not changing, and it's a straight line for the most part. Okay, same with Texas and New York. That means that nothing has changed in the way the vaccines are administered, okay, by the 2 administrations. Nothing has changed or improved, except it has slightly improved in California. California was in with this group until about here, which is 11 days ago, and it got a little kick up, and it seems to be improved. The slope is a little greater than it was. So that means they're administering them more effectively in California right now. But for all of these states, they're all straight lines running right through the time when the new administration took over. Nothing changed at all. Just wanted to point that out. All right. Now, again, this is the other issue with the comparing the United States to a single region at a time. This is the number of deaths now. Again, it says new deaths all the time. I don't know what an old death would be, but these are deaths from COVID as assigned by the terrible PCR test. But let's just take that for what it is. But remember, in the Northeast, it was very bad. A lot of people died in the Northeast. That's why this peak is so high back in March or April. I'm sorry, probably April. It says I'd have to subtract the days back at the exact date, but. Anyway, April and May, it was horrible in the Northeast, New York included, right? And then the South got it real bad. Remember when it was bad in Texas and Arizona and Florida and so forth? And then Wisconsin and the upper Midwest got it, and then the Plain states, and then the mountain states and so forth. But again, when you look at the seasonal bump and you add every single region together, of course, the graph is going to be higher here than it was back here. Yes, this is the United States, but back here, the United States was made up of the Northeast only, okay? So again, this thing's all cockeyed. You know, how many states are there in the Northeast? 7 or something, or 9? So the 9 states in the Northeast are way more than half of the entire country now, and there are only 9 states out of 50. So just think about it a little bit. That's why it's very misleading to say this is by far the worst time we've had. All right. So I'm going to stop here. I've gone over a lot of stuff that I have gone over in the past, but a lot of new stuff too, especially about the vaccine. Again, these variants are coming online now, and some new vaccines too. The AstraZeneca was a washout in South Africa. It turns out they've taken it off the market. Johnson & Johnson is about 50% effective in reducing the symptoms. And the Moderna and Pfizer vaccines are slightly less effective, I've heard, against the British variant and the South African variant. And they're in the United States now. They've been sequenced. So we know that it is the South African variant because they can do gene sequencing on the virus. And they're more transmissible than the original one. So they're going to spread like even greater wildfire across the country, probably. Although if the vaccines that people are getting are effective against those new variants to some degree, it will slow the spread a little, right? However, they don't reduce transmission. So it won't spread it it won't reduce the spread very much. Let's see, I haven't talked about masks, have I? It's something I should talk about just a little bit. But again, I sort of did this tongue in cheek here. Stay tuned for the next update when we tackle wearing 2 or 3 masks at once. When all of the randomized controlled trials and all of the graphs when different countries introduced mask mandates or didn't, or removed them, the curve never changes. There's never a little jog in the curve to a less severe slope or anything like that when the masks were introduced or mandated. Nothing in the curves changed. I've been over that so many times, and I hope you guys remember. If you don't, go back and look at some of the videos. And then, of course, we're getting executive orders that say you can't wear a mask on federal property. And then the press secretary never has a mask on federal property. So I just don't quite understand what everyone's doing here. I mean, I'm all in favor of not wearing masks. I think they cause harm, and they certainly don't help, according to the randomized controlled trials. But we've got the director of the CDC, a lady from Mass General, telling us to wear masks and that masks work. I'd like her to show me one study that isn't associative, that's randomized controlled trial. This year we did one in Denmark, or they did it in Denmark, and it showed that there was no significant difference in wearing masks or not, or the group not wearing masks. I mean, these people are scientists. Why aren't they looking at the data? All right, the correct data, not associative studies, because you don't know what the cause was when you look at an associative study, you know? Anyway. And then you've got the politicians not wearing masks in their private life after they've put people in terrible situations if they don't wear a mask in their business or something. And then they're going out to dinner at a restaurant and their whole group is sitting 1 foot from each other and not wearing masks. Okay. All right, well, that's the end of tonight. I hope your head didn't explode like mine did, but thank you for watching. And again, take a look at the Patreon page. And I just wanted to make a little list here of some ideas that I'm thinking about doing a video on. And they don't, of course, I'll continue with the virus and the vaccine if people can stand hearing it anymore. I've gotten very frustrated with it though. But I want to make a video on card counting, teach everyone how to count cards if they're interested in that. I want to talk about the physics behind music theory. And I'm a beginner. You know, if you look carefully behind me, you see drums and guitars, because I can't really figure out how to play any of them yet. But I understand music theory very well from a mathematical and physics point of view. And I wanted to make a video about that because I see a lot of people trying to explain like what it means to go to the fifth of the tonal note, and they're explaining it wrong. And I just thought maybe if I could just explain it from sort of a physicist point of view, it would be understood. And it would make music theory much easier. People get confused in music theory because they give the wrong explanations for why things are where they are and stuff. And I've just seen it so much that I'm just dying to do it. Anyway, I wanted to do a video on alternative energy sources from a physicist's point of view, because I know that climate change is going to come up real soon when the virus fizzles out. They're going to be talking about climate change and instituting some strange policies on that too. I just feel it coming. So I wanted to get out front and talk about the viability of some of the alternative energy sources. I'm telling you, without the subsidies, some of these things would not be viable at all. And the subsidies, of course, are being tacked onto your energy bill. So I just wanted to talk about that a little bit. Here's another thing that was a huge controversy earlier in the year. I don't hear it talked about too much now, but it just took me a long time to figure out the real reason why we should not be allowing rioters to tear the statues down. A lot of people immediately said, you know, we shouldn't erase history because you're doomed to repeat it and so forth if you erase it. And, you know, I sort of accepted that. It kind of made a little bit of sense. But I actually thought of a much more profound reason why we should not be doing it. And I'd like to make a video about that. I talked to a friend of mine who's Black, very smart guy. And he explained that it was hurtful for him to see a statue of someone that owned a slave. And I understood that. I even changed my view on it a little bit from talking to him. Very serious, smart guy. And, but I didn't really think deeply into it. And recently I did. And I think I've kind of figured out why, really, the real reason why we should not be taking the statues down. Even if they're hurtful, we should not be taking them down for a different reason than repeating history. If I make that video, you'll see what I mean. I also wanted to make them on the fetal circulation. That's the circulation of the baby in utero, which is very interesting, how it gets its oxygen and so forth without breathing, and how it changes at birth and why it changes at birth. It's fascinating to me. And then I want to do a related video on how we fixed in a little girl about this big, total anomalous pulmonary venous return. So after you've learned about the fetal circulation, how it changes at birth, then I'm going to show you how we fixed a congenital abnormality in a little baby girl. Her heart was about as big as a walnut. We're inside there trying to fix it. Okay. I do plastic surgery also. So I wanted to make some videos on some cosmetic surgery procedures. I've already made some on reconstructive procedures, reconstructing the face on a couple of patients that were injured very badly. And those are in my list of videos also, which you can see on YouTube if you put my name in. But anyway, on like a breast augmentation, how to do a breast augmentation in under 8 minutes with perfect results every time. A mathematical look at the fretboard on the guitar. When you look at all of the notes that are on that guitar, you wonder how you could ever memorize them. But I saw some mathematical patterns in it that I think will make it really easy, and I want to do that. And I made a feature movie a few years ago for no money. And I just wanted to make a video how we made a true feature film, a real feature film for under $350. And again, maybe other cosmetic surgery procedures, how we do it. It's very interesting when you see the actual surgery being performed. But anyway, thank you for watching. Let me know if you're interested in any of these videos, in me making any of these videos, and I'll be glad to do it. I actually hadn't thought of making the ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine and zinc video until I found in one of the studies on vitamin D that the hospital that was doing the study on vitamin D had everybody on hydroxychloroquine in Spain. And so I said, listen, if anybody, it shocked me because I thought sort of that had come and gone. But, and I said in the video, if anybody wants me to do one on hydroxychloroquine, which all the TB doctors say has been totally debunked, I'll be glad to do it. I'll look up all the studies and see why they were debunked. So when I looked up the studies, none of them were designed properly. And then finally, I found 2 countries, or did I find 3? I found 3 places where they had done a study on hydroxychloroquine correctly. One of them I had to throw out because it was associative. They had not averaged out the use of dexamethasone. So we didn't know whether the improvement was due to dexamethasone or not. But then I found 2 proper ones, and those are the ones that showed how well it works. Anyway, so I do appreciate your suggestions, and make any comment you want because I sure have learned a lot from your comments. Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. And I will see you down the road. Thanks again.